Hello, and welcome to the Medicinal Herbs podcast from Holistic Matters. I'm your host, Dr. Daina Parent, and this month we're talking with licensed naturopathic doctor and registered herbalist, Dr. Marisa Marciano. Marisa has expertise in both the education and clinical applications of therapeutic nutrition and phytotherapy, making her the perfect person to talk to us about a day in the life of a practicing herbalist. Thanks so much for joining us, Marisa.
Hello, thank you. I'm so happy to be here, Daina.
All right. And so to get us started today, I think there's some terms that get used interchangeably, but it's really worth talking about the differences. So Marisa, what exactly is an herbalist and how does this differ from, say, a naturopath and a homeopath?
So yeah, that's a great question because I don't know about you, Daina, you're a naturopath as well, but I don't know how many times I would be asked at a family get together or something, they hear I'm in naturopathic school and then be like, oh, so is that like a homeopath? And kind of having to suss out what those differences are, and then adding a herbalist into that, it can get confusing. So yeah, I think understanding the scope of each and like what each is good, especially if you are either trying to become one of those practitioners yourself or you're looking at maybe seeing one yourself. Homeopathy is really its own distinct medical system. It was developed in Germany, uses diluted homeopathic preparations, some of which are made from plants, but not all. So it's really quite a different approach. Whereas a herbalists are people who are really dedicated to just working with medicinal plants. Their approaches can be different. They can draw from like various traditions and teachings, but they're all going to have some sort of intimate relationship just with plants and their medicinal value. And then a naturopath can use homeopathy and or herbal medicine. Both are a part of our training and our scope of practice, but your naturopath or any naturopath may or may not use one or the other. So yeah, different tools for different skill sets, but a naturopathic doctor will be trained to use all of them, and a herbalist will be focusing with herbs, and a homeopath will be focusing with homeopathics. But it can get messy, of course, because those homeopaths and herbalists, as we'll see, are not licensed. So, and I think it's important also just to highlight that herbalists can be from various different kind of backgrounds. So scientists can be herbalists, clinicians can be herbalists, native healers can be herbalists. And I consider my grandmother a herbalist. So it can be so many different types of people from so many different backgrounds and walks of life. And they can each have their own different approaches too.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I wanted to touch on, the different licensing. So are you able to go into a little bit more detail about the licensing and how that varies by state and even by country?
Sure. So there currently is actually no licensing or certification for herbalists in the United States or Canada. So, for better or worse, anyone can call themselves a herbalist. Like I mentioned, my grandma can call herself a herbalist. So that's something I think as a client or a patient, when you're trying to seek out care, we should know that. There are, of course, different designations that we can talk about as well, but there really is no law against anyone having the right to dispense or recommend herbs. This, of course, can get a little bit gray by jurisdiction, depending, you want to ensure if you're calling yourself a herbalist, you can't be practicing medicine without a license. And especially in states where, there are maybe more strict licensing rules around. So for example, naturopathic doctors are restricted or are allowed to use certain herbs that maybe other people wouldn't. It can vary kind of by state. But yeah, there are qualifications that can be used that will help you to recognize somebody who has been recognized for having a sound degree of herbal knowledge or clinical experience. But again, this is not in any way recognized or regulated by any state or federal entity. So there are some herb schools and programs that will give titles such as master herbalist or certified herbalist or kind of other variations of that after you complete their trainings or courses. But again, these qualifications are not recognized or regulated in any way by any state or federal entity in Canada or the US. So that also means that there's no current licensing that would restrict a practitioner from recommending or dispensing herbs, even though you obviously want to be clear with whatever state you're living in what is the case, but generally that's like a constitutional right to be able to recommend and dispense herbs, but you can't practice medicine, of course, without a license. So no diagnosis or no treatment or no, not being able to make claims of curing with herbs. As long as you're not doing that, then there is no kind of you're still able to dispense and use herbs.
As you mentioned, and we know by your title, you are a registered herbalist. So can you talk about, so you mentioned the programs, that there's not necessarily one program that a person had to attend in order to call themselves an herbalist. But can you talk about what does a typical herbalism program, what is it like, duration? What do you study, and what might a program be like for maybe some of our listeners that want to become an herbalist?
Totally. Yeah. So my designation as a registered herbalist comes from an organization called the American Herbalist Guild. And so they're based in the United States, and they are an incredible organization. I highly recommend anyone who's interested in kind of deepening their herbal knowledge or working with just being involved in a great herbal community is to check out the American Herbalist Guild. So the American Herbalist Guild is an organization that you can apply to, and they offer a peer-reviewed credential, like an application process that essentially allows various practitioners to apply to call themselves a registered herbalist. And this is based on their clinical experience and their education. There's an interview process involved in that, some case studies that need to be approved. So essentially, it's a voluntary credential that this kind of long-standing, really, I would say probably the most well-recognized institution for herbalists in the United States can give this designation of registered herbalist. And if you're looking for a registered herbalist, that would be a really good place to go, because you know that anyone listed as a registered herbalist on through their organization is going to have clinical experience and is going to have completed a certain number of hours of education as well. So that they can still come from lots of different backgrounds, and again, not a regulated title, but I do think that it's one that is useful to know that, yeah, if clients are looking for somebody who is really experienced in the use of herbs, that's going to be a designation that offers that. So, but outside of like that, when you're looking at education, and if you're someone who just, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure just is interested in herbal medicine, you're kind of always, you have that spark, you're always kind of looking to learn more. I'm sure people have maybe searched for courses. So there are lots of different types to choose from, lots of different formats. It's really about what kind of learner you are, what your based on the different formats that are available, and also what your intention is, what the outcome you're looking for is. If you're looking to be a clinical herbalist, or you're wanting to maybe just work in a dispensary or work with herbal products themselves, there's take a more scientific approach, a more energetic approach. There's so much available. And yeah, I don't know about you, Dana, if you've kind of like looked for this in your own work, but yeah, it can be totally overwhelming. And as somebody with a little, if you have absolutely no background in herbal medicine, but I'm assuming again that people listening today have some knowledge or perhaps already working with herbs in their clinical practice, you might look at something a little bit more advanced. Whereas if you're a complete newbie, there's programs that will even include anatomy and physiology and kind of the real beginnings of what you need to know in order to be able to apply herbs. They are all over the world. I have this kind of fantasy of myself going to Italy and doing a week-long intensive with a herbalist there and learning about all those different plants in that region. Of course, you can go to India and to Africa and to China and do these like intensives that I think are really valuable. There's lots of on-site school programs where you can get a master's degree in herbal sciences as long as you have a bachelor before that. That can be nice if you have if you're looking for financial aid. That could be a nice offer. Distance learning, so many sort of online programs and classes, which also, of course, offer flexibility with learning. And I'll do a little shout out for the Holistic Matters herbal online course that I helped put together and is available on holisticmatters.com. It takes you through 10 modules, major systems, and herbs that would apply for that. And then there's apprenticeships and kind of doing that one-on-one work, finding a herbalist, connecting with them. That's really invaluable work. And many of my students, because I teach at the Naturopathic College in Vancouver, they really like to supplement the in-school work that we're doing by working in the summers on a herb farm of a colleague of mine. So being really hands-on with the plants in that way there is an amazing way to also further your herbal knowledge. So really, there's so many different programs. Remembering there's no one designation that is available to complete in order to then all of a sudden, get your stamp of approval and walk into practice. It's really quite an independent path that each herbalist needs to take, and just knowing what your goals are before you go in is important. And then, of course, the naturopathic universities, the accredited naturopathic universities, which Daina, maybe you can even speak yourself to like what your training, what your herbal training was like at Southwest.
Yeah, absolutely. So I attended the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicines, and it's actually since changed names. And we do have a herbal program within the naturopathic program. So we're really learning, as you mentioned, we're learning herbs, we're learning homeopathy, as well as a lot of other modalities. Um, and I know you have this special distinction that you just mentioned with your kind of specializing in herbs, that some additional training. Do you mind just touching on what your program was like? I mean, you mentioned to do some case studies, you mentioned learning about some herbs. But what was your formal training like with herbalism? And what does that look like on a daily basis? I don't know how long ago you attended this program, this herbalism program.
Yeah,
But if you can just recall back and just what
yeah.
a typical day in herbalism training looked like.
Sure. Yeah. So I graduated in 2011, which, yeah, it's crazy to think that it's been that long. But yeah, same for as you, for your program, naturopathic program. It was and I'm not sure about your experience, but in my experience, our herbal instructor was hardcore, which I'm really grateful for because, there's so much you learn in naturopathic medical school. It's overwhelming. Like there's just so much content that there's always going to be learning that has to be done outside of even those 4 years. But she really, really motivated me, at least, to really dive into herbal medicine, to make it. It was my favorite course. It was, yeah, a core modality, a core part of the practice, core part of our clinical practice as well. We had a full herbal dispensary in our clinic, 2 years of clinical training, where we had access to hundreds of herbs, liquid extracts, tablets, capsules, teas, whatever we wanted, and then working directly with other naturopathic doctors who had a lot of experience with those herbs. So that is undoubtedly, a really important part to gaining the confidence to then use those herbs out on your own in clinical practice. Our theory was very heavily based on, it was very evidence based, I would say, more like Western style herbal medicine with some influences from traditional Chinese medicine, Indian Ayurvedic medicine, but it was very much kind of Western evidence based. We Carrie Bones' Principles and Practices of Phytotherapy was our core textbook, along with David Hoffman's Western Herbalism. Those were kind of our two core texts. So yeah, very Western approach. And I personally just really knew that I wanted this to be a core modality in my practice. So took I took it upon myself to start TAing for the course really quickly. I started also teaching herbal medicine a few years out after graduation because I love how that kept me with the materials, and I continue to do that now because I think you can never stop learning about herbal medicine. It's always, our knowledge is just expanding every day. And so you have to kind of keep up with it. And, my clinical practice and my ability to teach at the college keeps me, I think, on top of things in that a way, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important concept as well, evidence-based herbalism. Can you speak a little bit more to that, and how important is it that you stay up to date, on evidence and reading the literature and reading some of the papers, and how does that really correlate to herbs?
Yeah, very, very important. And it's a balance, and it's different again for every herbalist. So I don't mean, to say that what I do is better than what any other herbalist may be doing. And I know many herbalists who start really energetic in their practice and then move towards being more evidence based, and then others who it ends up going the other way. Um, Personally, I am really excited by herbal research. I try to always at least once a year, especially for like a selection of key herbs that I'm using consistently in my practice, make sure I'm always searching for the most up to date, review papers, systematic reviews, randomized control trials, and learning what I can from those without leaning entirely on the outcomes that come out of them. So um, you know, you do need to be, I think, as a herbalist and any practitioner, be able to look at research, like critique research effectively, understand that herbs as, these incredible herbs are so much more than just their constituents. And they really don't fit the mold of that kind of reductionistic model that so much of the scientific research that comes out around herbs tries to fit them in. So we take it all with a grain of salt. But I do think more of a Western approach to herbal medicine, which is my personal approach, does lean a little bit more heavily on that evidence. I'm not gonna base my entire practice on it, but I do think that it's a really important informative part, and it will vary from patient to patient. So I have some patients that well, would not take a herb if they didn't have that evidence to support its use, whereas others feel much more of an energetic connection to the plants and just, want to know that, that tea has some traditional use or, leaning more on that folk use is more important to them. So I take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting and it's really fascinating because, in opposition to kind of this scientific, review process, you're talking more about the traditional use. So a lot of the herbs, have traditional use, and they've been around for thousands and thousands of years, and we've been using them for thousands and thousands of years for certain maybe indications that might not have the science behind them yet, but they have been very successful in the literature from, a while back. So I just think that's interesting. And then what you're saying is really combining those practices, taking a look at the science, taking a look at the traditional energetic use, and combining those into clinical practice.
Exactly. We get the best of both worlds in that way, I think. Mhm.
Absolutely. And then I know you've talked about clinical practice a little bit. Can you tell me, what does a typical day look like for you? You're a practicing herbalist, you're a practicing naturopathic doctor,
Mhm.
and what does that look like? What does your practice consist of?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, my life as a naturopath and my career path has taken some different directions. I've always kind of like use the analogy of like wearing different hats or hands in different pots or whatever. I do really like to supplement my clinical practice with a lot of independent research, education. That's a really important time for me. I feel like it feeds my clinical practice. To do medical writing, I'm always kind of trying to keep up with and I'm currently trying to update my a new edition of my book, which is the evidence informed guide to botanical medicine, which is like something I hope to keep updating every year. So um some days I sit down on my computer and I'm just searching the internet for all of the best research I can find and kind of trying to translate that into something useful for clinical practice. And then other days I walk into my practice, or these days it's I open my laptop and zoom in with a patient sometimes. Um, and because I'm a licensed naturopathic doctor, I'm practicing under my naturopathic license. So I'm taking a full medical history, setting out our goals and treatment plan. I'm then the core of my treatment plan is going to be herbs. I don't think any patient leaves without a herb, but of course that's going to be used alongside other treatment modalities. Core for me are going to be diet and lifestyle, nutritional supplementation. I live and practice in Vancouver, BC, in Canada, where our licensing also includes prescriptive authority. So sometimes prescribing medications or de-prescribing medications. We also have the ability to do acupuncture. So I do acupuncture in my practice as well. So whatever the kind of the patient needs in each visit, we're sussing that out. But I really like to always make time in a visit as a herbalist, as kind of just a plant person who really likes working with plants, and an educator who likes teaching people about plants, to always leave like 15 minutes in every appointment just to get the patient hands-on with the plants in some form. So I keep a full dispensary, as full as I can, at least of dried teas and liquid extracts and tinctures and capsules, and to get the patient, instead of going back into my dispensary and mixing a bottle for them and bringing it out and being like, here you go, send them on your way. I actually like to get them involved in the process, get them smelling the herbs, tasting the herbs. um, I find there's a real that connection. There's almost like a bond that can form once they meet the herb that they're going to be taking for the next month. And I really enjoy that process, and I find most patients do too. So that's a big part. And then just maintaining the herbal dispensary. So, having to order herbs and keep stock up to date and ensure that it's like high quality products that are present. Um, all of that's really important and really enjoyable too. I think as a plant person, to just be working with plants in that kind of setting. And I used to I haven't in a while since COVID and everything, but I used to do a lot of group-based workshops. So inviting patients and even the public, just anyone who was interested in coming to a tea blending workshop, or a tincture tasting workshop, or some sort of time where we could all get together and play with the plants hands-on. So that's been really important to me too. Yeah, mixing that the clinical work with sort of the creativity and even the art the behind herbal medicine with some of the science too is something I like to do myself. Yeah.
I love that. And just what a unique way to practice. And it sounds like you're, very diverse in how you practice. You're seeing patients, you're teaching, you're educating, you're maybe teaching herbal workshops. I mean, it just sounds like an amazing practice you have. I do think it's worth mentioning. Not every herbalist does have to have a clinical practice or be in clinical practice.
Cool.
And then also I just wanted to touch on as well, you mentioned, an herbal dispensary, and you've talked a little bit about, dried herbs, you've talked about liquid preparations, you've talked about teas. I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with these different ways that herbs can be put together, but can you speak to a little bit more in depth about, what does this mean? What is a liquid extract? I mean, some people may have not ever had that experience. What is that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the yeah, and I just want to, yeah, again, great point that not every herbalist needs or does have a clinical practice. Um, yeah, or you can have a little bit of one, or just do it solely, or not at all. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that you can practice herbalism for sure. Clinical practice is fun for me because you get to see the transformation of, like, you read about the stuff and then you can like see it change people's lives and right in front of you, which is so wonderful. But yeah, so maintaining a herbal dispensary, uh, I'm sure everyone, wherever you are in the world, somewhere in your town or city, hopefully is a herbal dispensary that you could go to. Most of them are now cannabis dispensaries, but not. They say herbal dispensary inside, but that's not the type of herbal dispensary. One where you walk in and it's just a room full of dried plants and different other forms of. And even most health food stores will have a small section of just dried herbs, and that's really the raw plant material that we use to then create tinctures and liquid extracts. And that is, if we're looking at like folk traditional herbal practice, that's what was always used. So the historical use that we're drawing from the thousands of years of use that we know of these plants being used medicinally are in those forms. And then the more kind of evidence-based modern usages are based on standardized extracts, more modernized ways of taking that plant and producing a product that is somewhere in between, a food and a nutraceutical and a pharmaceutical, even in some cases, where, you're standardizing for specific constituents and you're using maybe tablets or capsules in those cases to reach specified quantities of a plant's phytonutrient profile. So that is different than whole herbs, which is again much more folk herbal style, but still, incredibly valuable. And if you are some herbalists just get into medicine making, and medicine making can be lots of fun when you just buy the whole herb. And I have some herbalist friends who, it's incredible, their entire dispensary, they are they craft all of their own liquid extracts and products. So in liquid extracts are generally made from alcohol and or glycerin as a solvent, which is used to extract the medicinal properties of the plant and to preserve them. So that's a really wonderful way that herbalists historically could preserve a plant for years, decades sometimes, if it was made properly. So yeah, tinctures use generally a higher ratio of alcohol to water to extract those constituents, and liquid extracts are usually use the same process but are much more concentrated. And I won't get too much into concentrations and such, but ratio strengths of the amount of herb to the amount of solvent used to create the product. A liquid extract is going to be a ratio of around 1:1 or 1:2. So basically it's a highly concentrated, highly potent extract, probably more potent than our folk ancestors could create from herbs in the past. So they're quite strong, they're quite potent. And then we can take those liquid extracts and formulate them together. And that is traditionally what has been done, where you would combine many different herbs into those liquids into one bottle. Or like making a medicinal tea, you would take a combination of dried herbs in various gram quantities, combine them into a herbal combination, and then use water as a solvent, as a cup of tea. And there's so many applications outside of that, those are, I think, the main ways that most herbalists are using herbs, but it's lots of fun to get into culinary applications and topical uses. And when you have the raw herb in front of you, it's kind of sky's the limit. Like there's so many different ways that you can get creative and turn them into other kind of medicinal and even just fun cosmetic type products. Like it's something that I really enjoy too.
Wonderful. I love that. Such variety with plants and utilizing plants for so many different applications. So, what a great conversation we've had today. Thank you so much for joining us. I really think that gives our listeners a good background with kind of the difference between an herbalist, a naturopathic doctor, and a homeopath, and talking about the different styles of herbalism and kind of what those programs look like. Thank you so much for joining us today, Marisa, and we'll look forward to having you on the show again soon.
Thank you, Daina. It was really great to be here. I hope everybody listening today was able to take something of value away and maybe start their own path towards doing something new in their own herbal practice, perhaps, that they weren't doing before.
Thanks for listening to the Medicinal Herbs podcast from Holistic Matters. For more herbal content, visit holisticmatters.com. That's holistic with a W.